Workers everywhere are worried about AI replacing their jobs, and a new study suggests jobs are being hardest hit in the United Kingdom. And the study is by the investment bank Morgan Stanley. It's reported in Bloomberg. The research was based on a survey of firms that have been using AI for at least a year in 5 industries exposed to the technology. So they've classed that as retail, real estate, transport, healthcare equipment, and automobiles, very broad categories. Among that set of companies, so just among this sort of select set of companies, UK firms reported a net loss of 8% of jobs. In the US, AI also caused the destruction of some jobs, but that was outweighed by the creation of a larger amount of other jobs, which apparently are also related to AI. So according to Bloomberg, AI has created more jobs than it's destroyed in America, while in the UK, it's destroyed a lot more jobs than it has created. The Bloomberg article links the difference between the UK and the US to slower growth and higher labour costs in the UK compared to the United States. This is what they say. UK companies saw an average 11.5% productivity increase thanks to AI, with almost half reporting even greater boosts. But their US counterparts, which reported virtually the same productivity gains, created more jobs than they slashed due to AI. In the UK, the AI revolution comes just as employers are struggling with payroll costs, slow growth, and greater political instability. Firms are cutting jobs at the fastest pace since 2020, and unemployment is at a near 5-year high, according to the latest official statistics, as large minimum wage rises and an increase in national insurance contributions continue to impact staffing plans. So the argument here from Morgan Stanley and Bloomberg is essentially that in the companies which have been using AI, it has massively increased productivity in the United States, where they've got high levels of growth and flexible labor markets. That has meant that those companies have decided, great, we've got increased productivity, we can employ some people in different parts of the business now that we don't need them in this or that part of the business. And in the UK, companies have just said, great, this is a way to save money, essentially. Worryingly, the jobs that companies are reporting are most likely to go, so this is in this sort of survey done by Morgan Stanley, are entry-level ones. So tech firms need fewer junior programmers, as the senior ones can work with Claude Code. Legal firms need fewer paralegals, as that work can be done by ChatGPT. So the argument goes. In the UK, at least, youth unemployment is on the rise. So from a low of 7.2% in August 2022, unemployment of those between 18 and 24 has hit 14%. So almost double what it was just 3 years ago. Overall job vacancies are also down by 26% since 2022. And for jobs where AI has the biggest impact, like consultancy or programming, the fall has been steeper, dropping 37%. So how should we respond? Well, there is a positive angle. Britain has long had a productivity crisis, so artificial intelligence coming along and reversing that, solving the productivity puzzle, that would be a good thing. Just last week, Bloomberg reported on another study, this time from the Resolution Foundation, that suggested that there was a surprise surge in productivity, which could signal an economic turnaround for the country. However, if you just lost your job, or if you're a graduate struggling to find one, because there's no vacancies, because the senior lawyer is using ChatGPT instead of you, strong productivity figures might not provide much solace. What's more, if you were to believe the AI bosses, the transformation is about to speed up. Dario Amodei, and we've shown you him before, CEO of Anthropic. They make Claude and Claude Code. He was at Davos last week.
I even see it within Anthropic, where I can look forward. I can kind of look forward to a time where, on the more junior end, and then on the more intermediate end, we actually need less and not more people. And we're thinking about how to deal with that within Anthropic in a sensible way. 1 to 5 years as of 6 months ago, I would stick with that. If you kind of connect this to what I said before, which is we might have AI that's better than humans at everything in maybe 1 to 2 years, maybe a little longer than that. Those don't seem to line up. The reason is that there's this lag, and there's this replacement thing, right? I know that the labor market is adaptable, right? It's just like 80% of people used to do farming. Farming got automated, and then they became factory workers and then knowledge workers. So, there is some level of adaptability here as well, right? We should be economically sophisticated about how the labor market works. But my worry is, as this exponential keeps compounding, and I don't think it's going to take that long, again, somewhere between a year and 5 years, it will overwhelm our ability to adapt.
So the exponential he's talking about is he thinks that once you automate coding, then your automated coding will improve the AI model, and you have this sort of self-reinforcing spiral, I suppose, upwards. And to be fair to him, Claude Code does seem to be the sort of product which is helping people most in their jobs, right? Engineers or data engineers or whatever they say is genuinely very useful. Obviously, I'm not particularly in a position to judge. Aaron, what do you think here? I mean, there's two ways of looking at it, right? Because we do always say on this show, the UK has a productivity crisis. It's because we don't invest, we don't upgrade technology enough, we rely on cheap labor, and that means that companies have no incentive to sort of upgrade. According to this Morgan Stanley study, in the firms they spoke to, productivity is up 11% in a year, thanks to AI. So in theory, that should mean that growth is going to come back and we're all going to get richer.
Well, it depends. Productivity increased massively in the mid-19th century, but that didn't feed into higher wages for about 40 years. It's called the Engels pause. So you get the Industrial Revolution, obviously right at the beginning of the 19th century, really after the Napoleonic Wars, and it doesn't actually feed into higher living standards for a really long time. So workers getting a share of those productivity gains is the big question. You can have massive productivity gains, but if they're all going to the top 1% or 5% or 0.1%, it doesn't matter. And that's kind of where I think we're going at the moment. I don't think it's quite the top 1%, it's top 5% asset owners, etc. Big asset owners. Maybe it's a bit bigger in some countries, a bit smaller in others. In terms of the productivity, why is this happening now? I think it's not just AI. One, we had interest rate hikes. So the cost of borrowing for zombie firms who are dependent on basically cheap or free credit, they're constantly refinancing their debts. All of a sudden, that refinancing got a lot more expensive. They couldn't refinance, they went bust. Those were zombie unproductive firms. That's one reason. Two, we've made the cost of labor more expensive with the employer national insurance hike. That meant lots of people who would have been hired weren't hired. And people are saying, well, you know what, rather than hire a new person, what can we do to make our existing staff more productive? Investment in capital infrastructure, new workflows. Maybe you've gotten rid of 2 part-time roles and have 1 full-time person, things like that. And then you've got the AI. So, I mean, I don't know where it fits in all that, but it clearly does add to productivity. I think it's an extraordinary technology. Certainly in our game, in media, it's extraordinary. It is extraordinary. And I think in 5 years, it's going to completely transform media to the extent that it will be comparable to 25 years ago when people had newspapers and they're saying, well, people will get their news online. It changed the entire economic model, informational model of journalism. I think for the worse, by the way. Didn't change it for the better, but it changed it. And I think we're going to see something with generative AI. At the same time, when people talk like that, it's because they have something to sell. They've got a company, they've got valuations, they've got shareholders, they've got investors, they've got VC. That's why they say that stuff. But I think it's coming. I think 1 to 5 years is quite ambitious. I'm not Jan LeCun, I'm not Geoffrey Hinton. I don't know. It seems quite ambitious. And this whole idea of, takeoff and the J curve of recurring intelligence that can improve itself, who knows? But the improvements we've seen already in the last 3 to 4 years are striking. And if that's repeated, then clearly in knowledge-intensive industries, we're going to see huge shifts.
What's that? It's called the Engels gap?
Engels pause.
The Engels pause, sorry. So the idea of the Engels pause is that you have this huge increase in productivity at the end of the 19th century.
Start of the 19th century.
Start of the 19th century. But for a while, all the benefits are going to the factory owners and maybe also the landlords.
Correct.
And then the reason that later on that begins to get distributed is presumably because of trade union activism and because you've got quite powerful workers in those factories.
Not just that. I mean, you have the Shaftesbury Acts in this country, which is patrician liberals saying we shouldn't have children working in literal factories. So partly liberal patricians, it's partly trade unions. And then, that's what changes it. As I understand it, Michael, basically people who are, say, weavers, right, in rural Staffordshire in the 18th century were taller and healthier and had stronger bones than people who would have been working in factories in Staffordshire in, say, the 1830s, 1840s. They were healthier people. They lived longer. They were taller. So people literally diminished in size at the start of the Industrial Revolution. So you have a productivity takeoff, but in terms of human health, it was a catastrophe. And then it gradually gets better after the 1840s.
Until it massively overtakes those weavers, right? So
That's right.
There's a period where it gets worse and then it gets massively better. So in the long run, we're all better off. But I suppose there's two questions.
We were better off. I mean, there's no, it's not deterministic. It happened because people did stuff, right?
Yeah, no, I mean the future being now.
Right,
Obviously, we don't know what happens in the future, but the future for them being now, we're better off. So I suppose that there's two questions then, isn't there? Which is, well, one, that would have been much better if we did it without the Engels pause,
right?
Because for all those people who got, whose industries were destroyed, weaving or whatever, and then went to factories and had terrible lives. I mean, it's all very well saying in the long run it worked out okay, but in the long run we're all famously dead. So for them, it would have been good if we could speed up the process whereby the productivity gains were distributed. The other issue, which I suppose is so that's the sort of positive one. How do we do it without that? The pessimistic one is to say the conditions which allowed for that Engels pause to come to an end, which were sort of a powerful workforce, are no longer there. So maybe we would have an Engels pause now that never ends.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think so.
Which one do you think, though?
I think it's the second.
You think we'll have an Engels pause that never ends?
Have you seen? I'm sure you have. What's that film with Matt Damon? Elysium.
I haven't.
Have you seen it?
No.
Not seen it. So Elysium is this future where the elite live off planet. They have these incredible bits of biotechnological kit, which they've conquered death and aging. Meanwhile, on Earth, people are basically living in these irradiated, environmentally destroyed cities. So you have this incredible technology, but the question is about rights of access. And only a small minority of people get to access that technology. I kind of think that's where people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk want us to go. I kind of feel that way. I mean, I don't know. Maybe Elon Musk wants to democratize it to some extent more than Peter Thiel. I mean, Peter Thiel overtly wants to go back to a kind of feudal set of social relations coupled with AI. I mean, plausibly, right? I mean, I know it sounds like science fiction nonsense, but the thing is, Michael, I was talking about all of this in my book, which was published in 2018. All of it. And I said, white-collar jobs will be the first to go. Lo and behold. So these are really important conversations for the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Let's go to some skepticism about this. I suddenly lost my train of thought. That's what I was going to say. In terms of the patrician, I suppose there's if you were saying there were patrician liberals that also helped sort of end the Engels pause, I suppose now that would be the weird effective altruists, wouldn't it? So the sort of, because there are lots of people in Silicon Valley at the top of this industry, I'm sure Dario Amodei is one of them, who would say, yes, we know this industry is going to be completely transformative, and actually it just so happens that we're very enlightened, benevolent people.
Yeah.
And so we will use our power at the head of these companies to make sure this technology does benefit everyone. And that's a story they'll be telling. And I think among some of them, it's sincere. I don't know which ones. I mean, there are some effective altruists in Silicon Valley who I think are really sincere people who want everyone to live high quality lives. And their social groups definitely intersect with people who are very high up in these AI companies. But it does seem that as soon as you become a CEO of an AI company, you become a bit of a psychopath.
Well, Sam Altman is a great example here, right? The CEO of OpenAI. If you were hearing what he had to say in 2015, 2016, it was Star Trek communism. We have to manage this technology. It's going to disrupt everything. We have to do it in a way which accommodates the public interest. And now, we have to stop a singularity. And if we do, it has to be managed. And Dario Amodei was at OpenAI, Michael. He literally left and started Anthropic because he said, this guy's dangerous. He doesn't care about guardrails. There's a bunch of other people who've done that as well. I think Ilyas Skaver is his name. A bunch of very senior technical people at OpenAI are like, this dude is really dangerous. Elon Musk said the exact same thing about Sam Altman. The famous Joe Rogan podcast, where Joe Rogan's saying, well, Sam Altman's, this guy, he just cares about humanity and the species. And then Elon Musk was like, okay, check out what car he drives. And they, I think it's called a Koenigsberg.
It's a really fancy car.
Most expensive electric car, I think, in the world at the time, like hundreds of thousands of dollars. He's like, okay, if you believe that, good for you. And I'm, rare example of me really strongly agreeing with Elon Musk. Yeah,
Ilyas Skaver was part of it. So in OpenAI, there was an attempted coup against Sam Altman, which was led by the effective altruists.
Yes.
So that is a very sort of powerful social group in Silicon Valley. Helen Toner was her name. She was on the board, and the sort of effective altruist on the board tried to get rid of him. He fought back. He won, essentially. Before we wrap up, because we've been sort of talking big picture. This is a big story. The jobs are going. What's it going to look like in the future? I definitely think that's all relevant. In the short term, there is a counter argument to that which I began the segment to suggest that actually maybe it isn't AI taking away entry-level jobs. So this was a piece earlier in the month by John Byrne-Murdoch and Sarah O'Connor at the Financial Times. And they say that two of the data points used as evidence for the theory that AI is already taking entry-level jobs are misleading. So the argument, sort of as we put forward at the start, unemployment began rising when ChatGPT was launched. Therefore, it's ChatGPT causing the unemployment. The second one being youth unemployment has risen more than general unemployment. Therefore, it is these entry-level jobs which are particularly being harmed. They say that actually, if you look at actual adverts for new jobs, these arguments don't necessarily stack up. It might be a mirage. So on the timing, they write this. When we look at hiring for junior and senior positions in our 5 countries, the decline begins not in November, December 2022 as ChatGPT came online, but in mid-2022 as interest rates rapidly climbed. This looks like a hiring slowdown in response to worsening financial conditions, not AI. So saying the timing, yes, the jobs are already going before ChatGPT was launched. What actually precipitated that was the hike in interest rates, which you referred to earlier, Aaron. Then this was the bit that I thought was very interesting, very intuitive, where they're sort of throwing cold water on the idea that youth unemployment means that it's entry-level jobs which are going. And they say, not necessarily the case. And once you hear this, you'll think, oh, of course, that makes sense. So they say, the respective slowdowns in hiring for entry-level and experienced positions show very little difference. This is a cooling of hiring across the board, not a particular reluctance to hire juniors. And they say, how can this be, given that we know it is youth unemployment that is spiking especially high? And the answer is, an economy-wide hiring freeze will always show up as rising youth unemployment, since older workers simply remain in place, i.e. in work, whereas new labour market entrants have nowhere to go. When I read that, I was like, of course. You can't look at the line saying youth unemployment is going up and suggest that that means that graduate jobs are being particularly destroyed. It's just that it's young people who are looking for work. So you won't notice if you're an older person that hiring across the board has fallen. Well, you most likely won't notice as an older person because you already have a job, whereas you really will notice as a younger person because you don't have a job. So after 2008, it would have also been youth unemployment, which massively increased, because if there's a hiring freeze, it's young people who end up unemployed because they don't already have a job.
I was in a big Tesco the other day, Michael, in Pompey, the front lines of blue-collar Britain. Giant Tesco in Portsmouth. Beautiful Portsmouth. And
we don't have big Tesco's where I live, only really small ones.
Well, it's London, isn't London? Yeah. The Tesco Metro, little, small ones. And the interface, the great cafe, they've built a new cafe there, and it was like McDonald's. You have the interface, you order the food, and it was a level of capital infrastructure which I was just kind of like, okay, this is kind of weird. The idea that a Tesco in Portsmouth would have this. And of course, there are still people working there, but it's not as many people as were working in the same kind of business 5-10 years ago. And they all would have been either economic migrants or kids, young people, students, right? Another one, in my pharmacy recently, I just go for a prescription. I'm an asthmatic, have some inhalers. I sit down and there's like a black window just to the side of where they're working. I'm thinking, what's that? There are robotic arms, logistical robotic arms. Yeah, just like an Amazon logistics warehouse, moving things around so people order up the medication and it gets it. And again, that probably means they don't hire 1 or 2 people. So general purpose robotics, digitization, you don't need AI for that stuff to be taking lots of jobs away. And I do think for now, it's just nibbling at the edges, right? It's not huge numbers, but those are the places where kids would get their start. So I do think it's real, and I do think technology is having an impact on white collar jobs, but also, what are often called unskilled entry-level jobs for young people. I think it's happening on both areas, and ignore it at your peril.
Briefly, so on how we respond to productivity gains, this was a separate debate which was going on Twitter today, but I thought was very interesting. nonetheless. Olivier Blanchard is former chief economist at the IMF. So at the moment, there are lots of people on X, American policy people, politics people, who are constantly saying, America's really successful, Europe sucks, we're rich, you're poor. Olivier Blanchard, very, very mainstream economist, probably one of the most famous sort of neoliberal economists really in the world. He tweeted, "The French are not lazy. They just enjoy leisure time more than most. No irony here, and this is perfectly fine. As productivity increases, it is perfectly reasonable to take it partly as more leisure, fewer hours per week, earlier retirement age, and only partly in income." Aaron, amen to that?
Amen. And also people say Britain is wealthier than France, has a higher GDP per capita. That's because we work longer. So France has made the political decision to have a lower GDP per capita because they work less. If they worked as much as us, they'd have a higher GDP per capita because their productivity is high. Amen to that. And I think, this obsession with growth, I would like an obsession with productivity. Let's work smart, not hard.